Hey, everybody. Welcome again to Wisconsin Icons. My name is Bob Dolan. Very good to have you with me again on this episode. As always, Wisconsin Icons is brought to you by Pasternak and Zergaville, my title sponsor. You can find their help and information at www.injurywisconsin.com. You know, my intention with Wisconsin Icons is for all of us, including me, to learn just a little bit more about the men and women who have had a huge impact in Wisconsin, and in some cases, a huge impact beyond, like the featured guest or the icon on today's episode, Frank Lloyd Wright. Now, we've all heard of Frank Lloyd Wright. We know he was born here in Wisconsin. He was born in Richland Center. He was very close to his mom and his grandma. And we all usually say, when somebody brings up Frank Lloyd Wright, we all usually say, oh, yeah, he built some really cool things. And then we stop because we don't know what else to say, and we start talking about the Packers. But his impact continues today, and his impact was worldwide. My guest on Wisconsin Icons today is an author, Kristine Hansen. She has written about several topics in the past, but her latest book is about Frank Lloyd Wright. And the book is called Frank Lloyd Wright's Wisconsin: How America's Most Famous Architect Found Inspiration in His Home State. Kristine Hansen, good morning to you and welcome to Wisconsin Icons.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be with you today.
Well, I'm glad to have you. And here's why. I just told our viewers and listeners, Kristine, that, all of us, or most of us at least in Wisconsin, know of Frank Lloyd Wright. But we don't know a lot about Frank Lloyd Wright. And I wonder what was the hook for you, or what was the appeal to you? I mean, you've written books about a variety of subjects, but what was it about Frank Lloyd Wright that first caught your attention and then made you decide, I need to research this guy even deeper?
A lot of people, as you mentioned, they know Frank Lloyd Wright for his works, for his architectural works, but they don't know who he is as a person. And there are some themes with Frank Lloyd Wright and his work that really resonate with people, including myself. And one of those is a term called organic architecture. And what that means is that he was designing in accordance with the land, with the site that the house or the church or whatever project have you was on. And when you're in his houses or even his sites, you see this wonderful synergy with nature that you don't always see in a home or a building. There's a lot of natural light coming in. There's use of natural materials. The way that he's built that on the site is very intentional.
Would you call him an innovator of that style? And is it trying to be copied even to this day?
Definitely. Wright was known for organic architecture, and you do see a lot of that, especially now he died in 1959. A lot of homes in the 1960s and 70s were your mid-century modern ranch styles, and they also have that similar to his Usonian homes, which is a style that he worked on between the 30s and the 50s, where it's a very long horizontal design. There's a lot of windows, letting natural light in. And you do see that in the periods right after his death. And I think even today, I mean, who wants to live in a dark house, right? You want to, when you're inside, feel connected to what's immediately around you.
Did he have a philosophy, Kristine, inside the house? Did he have a style inside?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at his houses, no matter what the design is, because, again, he had a very long career. He died in 1959 at the age of 92 and was designing even up until his death, right? Including the Guggenheim, which is one of his most famous designs, the art museum in New York City. So the interior of his homes also embody that organic architecture. He's using a lot of locally available natural materials, rocks, woods, and whatnot. But the commonalities that you'll find are there's always a hearth, a fireplace extending all the way up to the ceiling. One great example is at Wingspread in Wind Point, just north of Racine, which was the home of the Johnson family of S.C. Johnson fame. That fireplace is going 2 stories up, but it feels more like 3. And it's just, he's creating these common spaces in the home for people to congregate, entertain, and spend time together.
So what's his appeal? I mean, just when I drive by a Frank Lloyd Wright, I can usually say, oh, that looks like a Frank Lloyd Wright, without, I'm hardly an expert in architecture, but you can almost always identify a Frank Lloyd Wright. So
Hmm.
what continues to be his appeal to just the regular folk, the regular men and women who drive by and say, boy, that looks fantastic.
When you're in his houses, there's a feeling of calmness, a meditative feeling. And I can't think of anyone who doesn't want to feel that way when you come home after the end of a long work day, or, picking up the kids from soccer practice, what have you. And it's just this very meditative feeling, and that is really what resonates today. And I think you get a little bit of that at the outside again with his organic architecture. He's thinking about, where am I siting this on the land? A great example is Falling Water, where the house is built through the waterfall instead of around it, right? So he's really capturing that essence. And in fact, at his home and studio in Oak Park, Illinois, there's a tree that goes through the roof, because that is part of the site, that is part of the plan.
See, things like that fascinate me because who would think of that? You
Right. Very
Until he came along, who would think of things like that? How did Frank Lloyd Wright find inspiration here in Wisconsin?
So Frank Lloyd Wright was born in Richland Center, which is adjacent to Spring Green. Spring Green is where his 800-acre homestead Taliesin is located. That's open for public tours. I always encourage people, if you want to learn more about Frank Lloyd Wright, visit his homestead, because that's where he lived and worked. That was a laboratory of sorts where he was always playing around with ideas. So you've got these 800 acres of rolling landscape in the driftless region. And if I were to wake up to that every day and look out the window, I would think that I would be very inspired by that and want to capture that in my designs. So one way that I think he's really done that is the organic architecture, which we talked about earlier, thinking about the site first, the design second. Also, the way that he designs his houses, no matter what style, is they're not your typical box. They're very built into the landscape, sometimes even into the hillside, right? Jacob's House 2 in Madison is a great example of that. It's built into the land. And also another thing that he did is he created entries that are partially concealed. So that became a problem to me as I was researching this book. Sometimes I couldn't directly find the front door, because a traditional housing style is to have that right on as you enter. It's almost immediately the first thing you see. And especially today, people are painting their doors bright colors, right? So very easy to see. So he's had that, partially concealed entryway off to the side. And I think that that was his attempt to immerse you into nature a little bit, even if you're in the city. Here in Milwaukee, we have the Boat House on the east side. That's a very small lot size. But again, the entry to the home is on the left, and you're passing through a little bit of greenery and landscape before you're entering into the home.
Kristine, were you able, in all of your research, were you able to determine what he was like, just, in everyday life, what his personality was like?
There were definitely some commonalities, people that I talked to. And again, these stories are now mostly on the second generation, right? Because he died in 1950. He was always over budget as an architect. He often would use as currency Japanese prints that he had bought in Japan. He was traveling to Japan in the early 1900s, which was, very ahead of his time. There wasn't a lot of travel between the continents at that time, but he was very affected by the Japanese architecture, the Japanese way of living. So he would use those as currency. He also was very particular about the houses, not just the design, which he had control over, but how one would live in them. And there were several stories I have in the book of people who the greatest story, I think, is of Wing Spread in Wind Point, just north of Racine. That was owned by the Johnson family of S.C. Johnson fame. So Irene Purcell Johnson, she was a film star who was married to Mr. Johnson, his third wife. She had Mr. Wright over. She was known not to be a fan of him, but he was over and he spent the night. And over the night, he rearranged all the artwork and the furnishings to how he would want it, right? So that's a great example. I mean, who does that?
I'm sure that pleased her very much when she woke up the next morning.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's just the kind of person he was. A lot of the houses like the Boat House on the east side of Madison, they are working, I'm sorry, the east side of Milwaukee, they are working very hard to have all the original furnishings back in the home by communicating with the original family that commissioned the home. And there's a reason why he designed those furnishings. I mean, they fit in the space, they are his designs. And so he was very particular about how one would live in the house. And I think the people who commissioned his houses knew that or should have known that, right?
Kristine, as you travel the state with your book and informing all of us about Frank Lloyd Wright, what level of appreciation, of public appreciation, are you discovering with the people of today for this man from 2 generations ago?
He really continues to resonate with people today, and it's not just people in Wisconsin. Every time I visit a site, I am continually amazed at how far people are traveling to visit
Mm.
Wright sites. The first time I went to Taliesin, there were people from New Zealand. When I toured Monona Terrace as part of the research of this book, there was a couple from Puerto Rico who had like a 10-day road trip around the state. They even managed to build in a Billy Joel concert in Milwaukee. So they had it very carefully planned. And so his work continues to attract people from all over the world to Wisconsin because this is where he was born and raised. I think if you really want to understand an architect or creator, you need to go to where they were born and raised and see what they were influenced by.
He was very proud of Wisconsin, was he not?
He was. He was very proud of Wisconsin, and Taliesin in Spring Green was his homestead. He did eventually establish Taliesin West in Scottsdale, Arizona. I like to think of him as an original snowbird because many people today are also wintering in the Scottsdale, Phoenix area. So he, really, but even in that site, he's very innovative. He's playing around with this desert landscape. There are many residential homes he's designed in the Phoenix, Scottsdale area that are similar to the ones in Wisconsin, but again, also incorporating that desert landscape, which is more barren, more stark, but equally intriguing.
Well, we know this: when he went to Arizona, he sure had a nice place to stay.
Yes, he did. He did.
Kristine, you've been wonderful, and again, I appreciate you just kind of updating and informing all of us about this man's life, because I think this generation, and even your generation, uh,
Mhm.
it's difficult to truly appreciate the impact that he had worldwide.
Mhm.
And I appreciate
Really
your
good.
effort with the book and your visit today on Wisconsin Icons. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Frank Lloyd Wright is renowned worldwide. He was big in Japan. But here in the States, of course, he's an icon. He's a legend. He did the Guggenheim in New York City. He was big in Chicago. He was big in Arizona, as Kristine told us. And of course, he was huge here in Wisconsin. And he was, as I mentioned to Kristine, and she confirmed, he was very proud of Wisconsin. In fact, he once wrote the following about his home state: "I love Wisconsin because I must strike root somewhere, and Wisconsin is my somewhere. I feel my root in these hillsides, and I know those are the oak that have struck in here beside me. The oak and I understand each other. Wisconsin soil has put sap into my veins. I love Wisconsin as I loved my mother and my old grandmother." Frank Lloyd Wright, indeed a Wisconsin icon. My thanks today again to Kristine Hansen, the author, to, in particular, Susan Kennedy. Susan, for providing all of the Frank Lloyd Wright photographs. Susan is at the Frank Lloyd Wright Visitor Center in Spring Green. So thank you so much, Susan. I appreciate also the assistance of March Schwetzer, who helped gather some information. And as always, to my title sponsor, Pasternak and Zergabel, Wisconsin, InjuryWisconsin.com. Thanks to you especially for joining me on Wisconsin Icons, and we'll chat soon.